Hi, everybody. My name is Jeffrey Gutierrez. I am owner of OTW, which stands for Our Team Works. And what we are is an organization that highlights support groups and highlights the aspect of collaborative learning. We impact the community through social, emotional, and mental wealth in order to better everyone else and one another. Every week, we are hosting an Empower Hour. It is a time where we spotlight some of our mental health therapists in our community. We are located here in West New York in Hudson County. So I'm very, very pleased to be able to spotlight some of the amazing individuals that are truly helping, especially during this time of COVID. Today, I have one of my co-hosts, friend, brother, and colleague, Fabio Areche with us. Fabio.
Hi, Jeff. How's it going?
Here you go. Hey, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Fabio?
Sure. So I've been in the basically mental health field for about 10 years now, primarily as a school counselor in Passaic County. I also, do some therapist work with Reseal Day LLC. I've been doing that for about a year now, and I've also had some experience doing in-home therapy for different agencies. So been around in the field for some time now. I'm just looking forward to try and give back and kind of, spread some of the experience I've had so far.
Great. Thank you very much for joining us today, Fabio, and being my co-host today. Guys, a very special treat. We want to spotlight an amazing individual, a therapist that has gone above and beyond in her practice. Veronica Olivares, licensed clinical social worker, who is owner for Creative Psychotherapy LLC. Veronica, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Definitely. I'm great. I'm so happy to be here with you guys today.
Okay, wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit about your organization, Veronica?
Yes. So Creative Psychotherapy really came about. I've also, similar to Fabio, have been in the field about 10 years as well. I think halfway through my master's program, I really got interested in alternative healing methods. So dance therapy, creative arts, writing, poetry, drama, music, and creative psychotherapy really was built from that concept. And so I really try to utilize these methods in my practice. And I think I pretty much have experience in home therapy, similar to Fabio as well. That was a big part of my clinical work and practice. And then I opened up my private practice a few years ago. So
thank you very much for sharing all that information, all you do. What's your experience been like currently in this COVID age, right? And what we're going through in the current crisis. What's been your experience?
wow. It has been really interesting, to say the least. I think that the first couple of weeks, there was a lot of uncertainty. There was a lot of anxiety. I think that I was, even in myself, I think I work with about 22 families, and reaching out to all of the families to kind of just figure out where everybody was at, in terms of employment, work, their own mental health, their situations. It was very challenging, very, very hard to move through those first 2 weeks. I think now I have a little bit more of a flow. I have an understanding of where everybody stands. So that kind of helps me understand my role in supporting these families and supporting them. So that's pretty much been the overall experience for me as a practitioner.
Wow, okay. Yeah, it's definitely a very difficult time for everyone, especially in our mental health world. We're kind of trying to help people go through this moment, right? Today specifically, we want to talk about relationships, right? And what relationships are about, and how relationships are spotlighted during this time, right? What has been your experience with working with relationships in general?
With my patients or with me?
Yeah. Yeah, with your patients,
I think what's interesting about this dynamic is that we're not exempt from this what's happening, right? So there's this interesting like mirror that's happening even with my patients, where like they're looking at me like, are you okay? Like, what's going on with you? What's your situation? And that's, typically in a therapeutic relationship, it's really focused on the patient. And so it's kind of hard to ignore the reality that we're going through as, as just humans, across the board. But with relationships, I think, in my experience, a lot of people work most of the day. They're not having to spend a lot of time with each other. And this is a time where you're kind of spending a lot more time than you normally would have. And so I think that, one, it's a real difficult time. And so people are, I think, a little bit more sensitive to that fact. But, we're in what, week like 8,
Like
10.
month one and a half.
So, after a while, it's kind of like, okay, this is kind of becoming the more normal thing. And tensions are starting to rise, and really trying to figure out, all the complexities of, are people able to work? Some people are not able to work and are having to pick up the brunt of providing for their partner, which is a new thing as well. And so these dynamics, it's almost like I consider it a renegotiation time, a reassessment time of like, where are we standing right now? What needs to be reorganized within the home? What needs to be reorganized around, how we spend, how we look at money, how we even share responsibilities with children. I mean, all of these things are being highlighted right now.
Yeah, definitely. Fabio, what's your experience like? I mean, you both have a relationship, live with your relationship. What's your experience with relationships during this time?
Yeah. So the reason why I want to focus more on relationships in a therapeutic sense is I've been blessed really with very, close relationships in my life. My family has been one to always try and stay together, help each other out through all kinds of issues. And for the most part, we are blessed to continue to support each other during this time. I have an amazing woman in my life, she actually we just started living together full time this past fall. So not only do we have that transitionary period of adjusting, like Veronica said, renegotiating things, but then now with everything else being kind of pulled away, now it's just like, okay, now it's all us 24/7, which is a whole new transition. So I can imagine like how our clients and families are reacting to that they didn't have those strong relationships before. Now they're being tested. And maybe that, they're finding new stressors, and it's showing them, kind of like kinks in the armor in a way. They're not able to step up in ways that they need to have a functioning system in the house. I know specifically, I see a lot of stuff with the families in school systems where now parents are teachers essentially, and they don't have that know-how to kind of navigate the needs of their children on top of their own needs. So it's just a completely new dynamic. And I guess every day we're just trying to figure out how to handle the new things that are coming up.
Yeah. How can couples work together better, Veronica, during this time? What should they be paying attention to? What should they be doing?
I think that what is really important, or what I've noticed, is that, what's been helpful for a lot of patients has been really asking each other for time and space. So this is going to look different if you have children, and if you don't have children, especially if you have children, being able to find time where, like, listen, I'm really going to need you to be with the children from this time to this time, so that I have some time to kind of regroup and take care of what I need to take care of. Obviously, that's, easier said than done when a lot of the younger children are attached to mommy and want to be around her all the time. So really trying to figure out a way where everyone can have a little bit of space. Even if that's, once a week, it's tremendous, especially helpful for mothers, because they are so overwhelmed right now. With becoming teachers, with having the regular, being at home, making sure that meals are cooked. I've been watching TikTok a lot, and I just see so many hilarious videos about moms like losing it. Like they're just like, listen, I'm done. I'm good. I'm not doing laundry. I'm not doing this. So even having days, I think even for me personally, where I'm not so hard on myself, you know, and I don't expect the routine to go the way the routine has to go, having some flexibility, compassion for myself. I think that for some of my mothers, that's been very helpful to not feel like they have to do everything to a certainty. I think there was a little bit of an expectation of like, now you got to create a routine and you have to do this. I mean, I think for the majority, yes, that's really helpful. I've seen a lot of my girlfriends that have kids, you know, have set up a corner classroom, have papers on the walls, have all the kind of organization that you would have in your class. And I think that's beautiful that parents are really seeing what it's like, you know, to have to be in that kind of educational role. And I think that that's, you know, that's an interesting dynamic that's happening right now. But then there's some days where she's like, girl, listen, we're not going to Zoom class today. Like we're going to do it. We're going to learn a dance today. You know, that's going to be our thing. So being able to be flexible, I think is really important, and really sharing that with your partner. Like, listen, I just need a little bit of a break. In my experience, I have my own place and my partner has his own place right now. So we're in that situation. So I've been kind of half and half, like having the ability to be by myself and then also being with him, which is a very different dynamic than if you have to live with someone 24/7. But we are very, you know, it's funny because before the quarantine, I think we spent a lot more time being together and present. And then when the quarantine happened, it was like, all right, we definitely need to not do that as much. Just like, let's have some time and space for ourselves, you know, to regroup and do our own thing. And that's been happening a lot more. And it was really just kind of understood. But I do think that conversations need to happen between couples, especially in terms of that. And another thing is that I've also noticed I've actually been more in communication with family members than I've had before quarantine, because we have these Zoom meetings now. We're checking in once a week, every 2 weeks, to make sure everyone is well. And so that's been a really beautiful thing that's come out from this too, where I speak so much more to my grandmother, so much more to my aunts than I did before quarantine. So that's a really great way to stay connected. I think staying connected is really important right now.
Yeah, definitely. I think something that Fabio had said before about having the foundation, even before this, sometimes if relationships were hard before this, it's like during this time, right? I think what you said, Veronica, you have your two different spaces, which is good, right? We get that space, and then sometimes we don't, right? And sometimes you have to live in that space. And if it wasn't going well before quarantine, now how hard is it, right? What do you guys follow? I mean, as therapists, I mean, are we like perfect at relationships? Do we know it all when it comes to relationships? Like, what do you guys think?
I will not say that. Not at all for me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know, I think what's beautiful about relationship is that it's a really important mirror for you. I think that I've learned more about myself in relationship than I have when I was on my own. And, you know, the whole self-love thing, it's all great. I totally believe in that. And I think it's so important. But some of the most fundamental things that I've needed to know about myself, I've really realized in relationship. And so, yeah, definitely not an expert on that. I'm still learning.
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, it's like the idea that the more you know you don't know. It's like it's an ever escaping limit of how much more you can learn, because what's funny is that not only are you learning and growing as a person, but your partner is also learning and growing. So you're not always the same couple that you were when you first started dating with each other. So it's a constant like rediscovery of each other. And I think if you have that open mindset, like we're gonna grow together, then you are allowed to keep on having that process of a discovery with each other. So to say that, oh, I know I got this, or, oh, I know what she's gonna do next, like humans are the most unpredictable creatures on this planet, that's why it's almost impossible to really say, okay, this person's gonna do that next. Like, no one has a crystal ball here, not even the best therapist.
That's so true.
100%. Yeah.
That's so true.
And I think that there's like a juiciness in not knowing, like having that mystery, having that like, wow, like, this person constantly surprises me. This person is evolving, is growing, is a living, breathing thing and can go whichever way they want to go. And man, I'm blessed that they want me to go with them. I'm blessed that they want me to be in this with them in their exploration and discovery as well. That makes it fun. It keeps it interesting.
Right.
Let's start from that, right? Veronica, you do a lot of energy work, right? So tell us a little bit about how that energy and how important that energy is being in this time if a couple has to be together and maybe didn't have that foundational piece before. How important is it to have the right energy when we're now in this time of quarantine and in this time of crisis?
Yeah, I think that there's so much misinformation about energy and energy work. I mean, it's starting to grow more now, but I think even just biologically, there are very significant differences between men and women. And this it gets complex and complicated, but simplifying this, and I've learned a lot of this actually from my partner because he's really into the energy work field. A lot of he'll kind of put it more on the male that men are really the givers of energy. So a lot of times when there may be some kind of conflict, there is a giving of energy that is maybe not, it's not in alignment maybe with the mutual vision or goals for the couple. And this can be easily fixed with the right conversations, with talking about which direction are we going in, are we on the same page, do we want to do the same things? And I think that these conversations don't happen enough. I think being honest is so hard to do in relationship. It's so hard to really be raw and to really be vulnerable. And I think that it's so much more important than people really think to just say, what, and I'm learning this too, because I want the truth, but can I handle the truth? And I'm really learning to work on handling the truth. It's like, it's more important to me that I tell, I'm told the truth, but also I have to work through some things sometimes. And I think that a lot of that work, honestly, has to be done within yourself and then brought back to the table. So it's like, okay, you told me this. And a lot of the times it's like, you tell me this and we fight and we get into arguments, and then that energy becomes very off. Whereas if you tell me the truth and I take it to myself, and this is where I have the upper hand in having my own space, because I get to kind of go and reflect and talk to people that I trust and love and that are going to give me, honest feedback that I can write in my journal, and I can kind of organize my thoughts around things, kind of like a draft before I submit the final paper. I don't think that we draft enough some of the more complicated conversations before we bring it. I come in, I'm like, blah, 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 rubbish and emotional, and it becomes drama versus really getting to the core of the issue. And so I think that we are run so much by our minds when we really need to use our minds as tools. It's like, my thoughts are not always facts. My thoughts are not always, telling me something that's real. Sometimes I'm making up stories. Sometimes I'm staying really connected to a narrative that's not helping me. And so I think that there's an intersection of like, thinking about energy work, but that our thoughts kind of really take us into these whole places, because it does impact our energy. Our thoughts become emotions. Our thoughts become, feelings. And if I can nip that in the butt first and really connect with those thoughts, then I don't have to make the energy such a complicated thing, And that's a little bit of my perspective on having learned from him what energy, is about.
Nice. Nice. Fabio, what are your thoughts?
I mean, she made a lot of good points. I think having the space to process is so important. And it's even a challenge now, again, with people who have no place to go, if they're constantly around their partner, then yeah, you find yourself getting into like squabbles over things that don't sound that serious on paper or on the surface, but then you still somehow, have a fight about it. And sometimes you need that separation to process. And, it's funny that some people, for some reason, they don't like to ask for help, right? They feel like if they're going to bother people or if they talk to their friends about it, then they're gossiping or they're putting their business out there. But I feel like we need a third party sometimes who's kind of removed from the relationship to kind of give us that unbiased outlook. Because let's face this, like, a computer that has a virus can't clean itself, right? It needs an outside software to do that. So in a sense, whether it's a therapist or a family member or a friend, whatever, we need someone to kind of like give us that outside perspective. Okay, for example, if we're having an argument, talk to a friend about it, and they can be like, no, you're kind of lying there, or you said that kind of harshly, can you rephrase it? And sometimes that'll help you to kind of put it into perspective. Yes. And then the other part about just being a mirror for each other, I think that's so true. Like, you really can't know yourself outside of relationships with other people. Yeah. And sometimes your partner, what Veronica said about vulnerability is so true, because people want intimacy, right? People want close connections, but then they're afraid what happens when you get so close to somebody. Because only the people that are closest to you can push those buttons as deep as they can, and that it can be painful, And then we have all these, whatever defense mechanisms that we came up with over the course of our lives. And, it's crazy because like we know we love the person that we're with, right? We know we care about each other, but they could just say something or give us a look and all of a sudden it brings us back to childhood and triggers something that completely like sets us off. Yep. And then we forget that that's our love, like that's our partner, right? So sometimes we kind of need to remove ourselves for a second and kind of like you said, let that energy kind of flow through us, or find a way to redirect it and then come back with a more calm way. So I love the idea of having a first draft, right? Because it may not always come out nice the first time you say something, like she said, our thoughts are going fast, maybe we're caught up with protest behavior or emotional hijacking, like our emotions really take over and then we get into fight or flight. So I think calming down is so important, and then just having that space to process and then come back and really focusing on what's the core issue, like allowing yourselves to be vulnerable and then really speak about what you need. So I think at the end of the day, our main goal is to ask for what we need, which is one of the hardest things we'll ever have to do. But if we can do that, usually people are receptive because they want to help, usually.
Yeah, definitely. I love what you said, Veronica, about starting with the relationship with yourself, right? So there's a book that Fabio and I have read a long time ago called The Mastery of Love by Don Miguel Ruiz. An amazing, amazing book of mastering love, and really talks about mastering love within yourself, And I definitely think that we need to start with ourselves and then understand the relationships that we built with our families, to then transfer this knowledge to the relationship that we now build with our friends, with our partners, and finally with our children, right? But I think it always has to start with the you, right? So can you explain that a little bit more, Veronica? What does it mean to have a relationship with yourself?
Ooh, I remember when I was first told you need to love yourself, I was so mad about that comment. I was so mad. I'm like, what do you mean? I do love myself. Like, how dare you, right? But it obviously over time there was layers to peel back and things to look at in myself, and I think that it's really I use a method called internal family systems. I don't know if you guys are familiar with internal family systems, but it comes from family systems. And what I like about this method is that it really looks at ourself as a system, right? So there are, and there are actually a lot of different, I want to say, spaces of thought that really are connected to this concept, even in Buddhism, even in across different religions, where it's like, I'm made up of a lot of different things. Some places will say beings, some places will say parts. And I think that when I found that method, I was like, wow, this is a really cool way to break down the one person, right? And to say, what is my relationship to these parts? Because essentially, just like we want to be seen, our parts want to be seen. And, we can develop a nurturing or even a true self part, which to me, it really means like my connection with the divine, like my connection with the universe, my connection to something greater. And how can I connect with that enough to be the conductor of this orchestra of parts within myself? Because some of them are very problematic. Some of them want to play the piano when they're not supposed to, or play the saxophone when they're not supposed to. And when that happens, it sounds like a hot mess. But, if I can really create a relationship with these individual parts, then they're more cooperative, they're more collaborative. I can create committees of parts, if you want to think even in the spirituality realm, when people go to readers or they go to people, this is like, I'm going to a council of ancestral beings or spirit guides or things like this, and they're giving me their opinions or their ideas about things, and I can choose in my true self to say, you know what, I'm going to add that to the equation. I'll take that into consideration, or I'm not going to take that into consideration. So my whole goal is to say, I ultimately choose, right? In my best self, I ultimately choose what I listen to, because, let's talk about anxiety, for example. It's not a horrible thing. It helps me in a lot of situations. It's helped me see things, in a lot of situations. And so sometimes if I'm letting anxiety run the show, there's a reason that it's running the show so much. So I'm like, well, anxiety part, why are you so anxious? What's going on? And that's where you can use drama therapy, creative arts. You can find ways to have conversations in different ways that really helps you really look at yourself as a whole dynamic being, because we are individually so dynamic and complex. And as we're growing and evolving and meeting others, we're meeting more parts of ourselves. Like, wow, I've never acted like that before. Like, this person really pulled something out of me.
Yes.
And so that's a constant, right? It's a constant relationship and a constant conversation. And so when I think about my relationship with myself, I think about myself within this dynamic family inside me. And how can I, constantly remember that I hold the reins, like that I'm the one that says, this is how we're going to go. And this feels good for me. And this feels joyful. And this feels like it's elevating me versus holding me back, hurting me, or I'm hurting myself, right? We talk about self-sabotaging and things like that. These are parts of us, in my understanding and in my study, has significantly helped women become more emotionally well, to learn that about themselves. Because it's like, then there's not so much guilt also. Like, there's like, there's something that's coming up. I don't know what it is, but I know that's not me. I know that that's not me and my best self. That's just something trying to get my attention, and I need to give it attention. And then the onus is on you and not on your partner to be like, hey, I'm anxious, you're making me anxious, why don't you fix that? It's like, no, there's a part of you that can control that and can manage that before bringing it to your partner, because they can definitely ease the process, but you ultimately are the ruler of yourself, right? The governing agents. So, yeah.
Amazingly well said. I think that in our upbringing, in our understanding of the relationship with ourselves, there's a part that plays, there's multiple parts that I think play tremendously on this, right? Our culture and many times our gender, right? So you kind of touched on that, Veronica, as far as being a woman. Fabio, what are your thoughts about how us as men,
Mhm.
right? Like us as men, how do we learn relationships as men? And then I'd love to hear from Veronica as far as like how is that different than how women learn about relationships from the relationship to yourself to the relationship to others and partners. What do you think about that, Fabio? How do we as men kind of learn that?
Yeah, I think, I wrote a couple of things down here. I think a lot of it is scripts, right? And it's funny because if you study gender over time, it really is fluid, like for maybe, in ancient times, we were maybe more matriarchal, right? Where the woman was more of the head of the civilization because they controlled the families, they controlled, the connections, and somehow along the lines that turns like male dominated ways of governing and stuff like that. So fast forward to now, I feel like for men, it's mostly where men are identified by what they do, and maybe women maybe more so by what they have or who they're connected with. So men is very like work centered, right? They want to produce, they want to accomplish, they want to achieve. And I guess that's why you see more men in maybe positions of power or status or stuff like that. Yeah. So when it comes to the dating world, you could say that like, I know for us maybe when we were younger it was more like a game, right? About how many women you can get, or who can they did the best looking woman, or who can compete, right? For men, it's very competitive, a very competitive arena. But then I feel like a lot of men don't learn how to maintain relationships because it's not part of keeping the score, right? So maybe for them it's like, okay, who can get the most women or the most attractive one, but then like they stop keeping score. So then they don't, okay, now what game are we playing? So I don't know, maybe women might see that differently.
Yeah, I think even when we were growing up, like we get this message that it's not okay to be vulnerable, right? And
Sure.
like if you're vulnerable, you're weak, right? And we need to be
Yes.
strong all the time. We don't cry,
Right.
we don't complain. Like we have to man up, right?
Yes.
And we get a lot of that message, I think, growing up. It's funny because Fabio, when he was talking, he reminded me of in college we took a psychology course, the psychology of women. Like there was actually a course
What?
at William Patterson. Yeah, it was
That's
called right.
cool.
It was called the
Yeah.
psychology of women, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was basically gender studies, but it focused
Right.
primarily on women. Yeah.
You
Yeah,
guys
and
chose
I
this, you
remember
guys
being in
chose this
that.
as an elective, didn't you?
Yeah, we
Yeah,
did.
we this is us being in college. It's like, oh, look at this class, man. We're
You get to
probably
figure
we
out
got a lot
women,
of
like,
girls in this class.
Yes, finally, we'll figure it out. I need to take that class too, by the way.
What do you think about that, Veronica? What's the changes between that and the information that maybe you got as a female?
Oh, yeah. So I think when you're talking about vulnerability with men, it makes me think about the author Brene Brown. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with her. She's
yes.
pretty popular. And she has a book about vulnerability and discovered, I think, in her research that when men were vulnerable, women, really responded to that in a very, I guess she would say it in a disappointing way. And I think that that's a really, I mean, that really jumped out to me from that book so much because it made me think about myself and my own ideas and thoughts about men. I mean, growing up for me, I was really ingrained and trained to be independent because so many of the men in my life really left or couldn't be around or whatever the case was, and so I was trained to really think independently, to not depend on men, to not, and I think that that was a little damaging, because what happens with that is it almost creates an enemy kind of idea where when I'm trying to be in a relationship, like there's a lot of subconscious work happening where I'm like keeping them away or I'm pushing them away or I'm saying I don't need you, and that's the last thing I think we need to be telling our men as women. I think that men need to feel needed. I think men have a hugely significant role in our lives, and when we're taught to be superwoman and do everything alone, first of all, that's not sustainable long term. And I can tell you that from, experiences of seeing the older women in my life who decided to not be in a relationship, and how difficult that is for them now. I think that women do have work to do around holding space for men's vulnerability. And I definitely learned that, the hard way. I learned that the hard way in my previous relationships, and, still working on that till this day, to be more sensitive to that, and to allow for that space, for men to be vulnerable in my life, especially the ones that are intimately connected to me. And so, yeah, that jumped out to me a lot. And I think that it's very, we're living in an interesting time. Environment matters, just like you said. Back in the day, the setup was so totally different. And now, women are working more, they're in more places of authority. And the psychology of women, I mean, that's a mouthful right there. I mean, just like right now, I believe that women are learning so much about themselves in many ways. And the more that we learn about ourselves, I think the more that we can make these kind of more grounded decisions, right? Like a lot of the work that I do is actually predominantly with women, but there's an intersection of perspective, of lenses. There's the internal family systems, which is like I'm made up of all these different parts and I'm learning about those. Then I have a lot of reproductive health, for women, where it's like I have a cycle, I have a whole thing going on here. This impacts my mood, it impacts my emotions, it impacts, how I feel on a day-to-day basis. And then I combine that with, indigenous knowledge and ancestral wisdom of like spirit and the moon cycles and nature, And so when women have all the information that they need, they can make better decisions about themselves and how they relate to others. But because we are so far away from that knowledge and information, we're just like, yeah, I'm going to be CEO of this job, and to the sacrifice of family and the sacrifice of relationship. And that's cool because that's how I was trained. Then women claim to be that's what they want, right? But do you really want that? Do you want to end up by yourself running this kind of company, doing these kinds of things without collaboration? I see a lot of women being really cutthroat, really nasty to women that are in these positions, are bosses for my friends, and treat them like crap. And it's like, are you really happy if you can't even treat your employees well? If you can't have good, real, truthful conversations? If you can really look at the person as a human and say, wow, she's really doing a great job, and I cannot give her not one validation around that, because I'm in this position and that's it. That's where I stand. So I think that there's a lot of work around that. I want to teach a psychology on women class. Darn it.
Right. And I think you could absolutely it took a whole semester for us to learn. We still have
that's a whole thing. I'm about to do a course on my own. Just Zoom. That's it. Do a Zoom. You guys just created something right here. We're planting seeds. It's okay.
I want to share the US Census just let out a number of single mothers, right? And in 2019, the single homes with only a mother was 15,764 in the US Census, right? It's probably not a huge number. Again, probably just how they're creating the numbers. But in comparison to father only, there's 3,234. That's such a significant difference in numbers. And then it talks about, so it goes through like since 1990, right? In 1990, there was mother only 13,874, fathers only 1,993, right? So now more fathers are finding themselves in a position where maybe they're feeling that they're more part of the home. But we still have a very long way to go. I mean, I think especially being Latino in our culture, you see so many single mothers, I grew up with a single mother myself, and it's got to be so difficult, right, for a single mom to raise a man, right? Because I think, Veronica, something that you said before about like women having this thought of even themselves not finding vulnerability a certain level of attractive. So imagine how they now teach us to do that,
Right.
right? What do you think?
Oh man, don't get me started. That's a whole conversation. I think young men without fathers is like one of the worst things that happens in the United States. There was actually a really great TED talk from this woman who is an attorney and specifically works with men custody issues, like when parents get divorced and who gets to have the children in the home, and how often the visitation and all of this, and really was saying some really astounding statistics about how the likelihood of a young male going to prison without a father, the likelihood of a young male going into drugs without a father. And it was just incredible. It was so heart-wrenching to watch that. And I do think that women, raising men, it's a hard thing for me to say, but it's not the best setup. It's just not. It's just not. Young men need male role models. They need really good real male role models. I mean, psychologically alone, tremendous, tremendous. And so we do a lot of disservice. I mean, it also hugely impacts girls too. I mean, think about it. If you're a single mother, there's going to be a lot of resentment, a lot of bitterness, I mean, I experienced this too, right? And a lot of times moms don't even want to really talk negatively about their ex-husbands or their exes to their kids, but it's felt, children feel things. And it's like, you grow up like, I don't need that. I don't need that. I'm good. Okay, I'm good. I don't need that. And how
Mm.
detrimental that is in relationship. It's not good. It's not good for me to think that I don't need someone else, and for me to give that message, especially to my male partners. So definitely a disservice for sure.
Yeah, and I think it affects us a lot in how we then have relationships in our future, right? So, Fabio, what are your thoughts about this when it comes to having a mom and a dad, or having a male and a female figure in your life? Because again, the dynamics aren't always just male and female, right? It's sometimes having two different opinions as parents, right? Where we live in a culturally dynamic world where it could be two males or two females having a child as well. Sometimes it's just about that thought process of having two different mentalities and helping raise you as a child. Bobby, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, if I can just share, my parents have been married this past November 42 years.
Yay!
Wow,
You know,
That's an
and
nice.
accomplishment. That's
yes, yes.
beautiful.
Yeah, for sure. And not to say that they didn't have their ups and downs, and I saw certain things growing up and I questioned, how close they were, but I think the mentality is really like you work things out, right? And I think that was the clearest message that I picked up, that no matter how bad things got, no matter how much you struggle, like family stays together. And I think that message is maybe what single parents have a hard time teaching their kids, because all they see is broken homes or scattered families. And they're left to think of, well, how am I supposed to build a family if I don't know how that's done? So I think just having a family unit is so powerful, because it shows you what it means to work together, right? Teamwork, sacrifice, being able to meet someone's needs, or kind of like, put your needs aside for the needs of someone else. Those are so many strong lessons. And as Veronica says, I think the system comes from the individual and then expands to the family, and to a greater extent, the community, right?
Yep.
So you start by learning how to be at one with yourself, right? And then you use that to enable you to have better intimate relationships with a partner, significant others, and then expands to your family if you create your own family, if you have a close family around you, and then your community, right? So it's all lessons on how to get along with people. And if you don't get that with parents that are separate, or if you have, parents that are arguing with each other, with custody issues, or, single moms who are resentful, right? Because like you said, they pick up on that energy. It's going to be much harder for that individual to learn how to get along with others. You know, if they don't have their own social circles, if they don't get into their own organizations or something like that, you know, how else do they pick up on those things? So I think it's a huge benefit to have a family that's intact.
Yeah, definitely. And at the same time, I think it's also important to make sure that when we do have that family, we're putting a certain level of strength and focus into it, because we also come from this mentality. I see it a lot in the couples that I see, especially Latinos. I deal with a lot more of Latino population where they have that mentality of working through it as much as they can. And sometimes though, I feel like that transfers into something more toxic, where they feel like we are only together because of the child. And it's no longer about them. It's they now put that responsibility on their children, when in fact, like, their children are trying to receive from them, right? What are your thoughts about that, Veronica, about this whole concept of let's stay together just for the children, or we should stay together for the children?
Well, I will put out there that I remember reading a study that it was saying it's actually better if parents are really at that point where they don't want to be with each other and there's a lot of animosity between the couple and toxic, traits, that it's actually better for the children, for the parents to separate long-term psychologically than to stay together. And so the idea of staying together despite everything is, I don't think that that's the best approach. But also, like you said before, the focus matters, and like, I think that we have the power to do so much, if we put our focus and our intentions in the right area and renegotiate and reassess, and I think relationships need to do that. We go through phases. I mean, what I liked when I was 21 is not the same of what I liked when I'm
Yes.
32, like, things change. And can we, I think I was listening to a psychologist recently talk about this, and he was saying that, a couple should at least spend, I think he said something like 90 minutes, was it 90 minutes, like a week, like, or at least every 2 weeks, having a conversation about the management of the relationship and the management of like the home. It's like we need to come together and sit at the table and say, hey, what has changed, what's working, what's not working. And I think that would salvage a lot of relationships if people just created the time. See, when you don't have the time and everything else becomes a priority, it's very easy to feel like, well, I'm not important to that person, so screw them. And you go into this rabbit hole of like, it's just unnecessary. When you can sit down and have these real conversations, relationships do get lost when you don't commit to that time together. They will unravel, just like anything else. You take your car to get maintenance, even if it's a new car, you still need to get it maintained, and we're very much like that, individually and as a couple. We need to keep our maintenance going, and that's, I think, would really change a lot of perspective on just like, we're just going to do this for the kids and that's it.
Mm.
And it has
What
to happen, it has to, as soon as possible, begin.
What are your thoughts about pursuing couples therapy? Is it important? Should most couples do it? I'm from the mentality, honestly, like, I'm like, I think every couple should do couples therapy after like a year or two being together, just to do a little checkup. I've seen some amazing, amazing couples come by my way after only about 1 or 2 years of being together, and we've been able to really create some foundational work. Versus I've seen some couples that have been together 15 years plus sometimes, and it's become very difficult to now start that process. What are your views on couples therapy and the importance of
Listen,
it?
I think two things. One, I'm a therapist. I'm all about therapy all the way. Two, counsel has always been part of our lives from the beginning of time. We have always sought counsel from an elder, from people who have experience, from people who have knowledge. And I think that we in modern society are almost these council members, right? People that people can go to because they've specialized and studied in specific areas and specific things. And so it's a newer version of it. But absolutely, I think that I think that everyone should have a space for themselves to be able to reflect and be intentional in how they take care of themselves. 100%.
Fabio, what are your thoughts? Couples therapy.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, even the best people can't solve all the problems on their own, right? We always need an outside source to kind of help us fine tune things. We have to think outside of the box sometimes. And if it's just two people all the time, you're going to come up with the same issues because it's the same information going back and forth. You need a new level of thinking to get you out of a problem that you used an old way of thinking that got you into it, right? So whether it's you're reading new information or you're discussing it with friends or you're working with a trained therapist, that you need that outside agency to kind of get you through that. And when it comes to therapists, I mean, especially someone whose focuses in couple therapy, there's no greater resource because they've literally studied it. So, humans, as varied as we are, we have a lot of tendencies. So be able to learn these tendencies, you can help fine tune, because I think the number one reason why couples get into issues is because they don't know how to handle the problems that arise. So if you go to someone that already has seen these problems and has an idea of how they can be resolved, it's so much easier than for you to try and figure it out on your own. It's like if you're part of a sports team and you go out there and try and beat another player without a coach, like, you're going to be scrambling on the field and, may not be making the best plays. But if you have a coach, you come in halftime, you reassess and you get that pep talk or you get that new strategy. It's kind of the same thing. So I would agree. I think every couple should definitely go through with it.
Yeah, and I think that there's some amazing books that couples could really start with. I mean, I think even in our therapy, I do a lot of like emotional focused work, and something that I've learned myself from books like Hold Me Tight, Love Sense, right, is the things that we do that are kind of like protest behaviors, like Fabio has said before, emotional hijacking. I like to have a little rule, and maybe we could leave our viewers with some real good tips that they could enhance their relationships. I myself like to feel that I tell my couples that try not to disagree, right? Like I think that you have the option. Everybody has the right to disagree. For me though, it's like your partner is like your teammate. It's like I tell them, if you're in the basketball court and you're about to pass the ball to somebody, that person at that point, whether they agree that they could take the ball or not, cannot look at you and say, nah, I'm not going to take it. No, they got to grab it, right? Because that's their teammate and they got to do their best with it, right? So I tell my couples, listen, let's maybe focus on creating more teamwork, because if your partner has an opinion about something, that is their truth. And because that is your teammate, you have to take that truth as much as possible and play the game with that, right? Like work with it. Let's see what comes from that. So sometimes I think we get into these cycles of disagreeing. No, that's not it. No. And I hear so much no's in a lot of my relationships when they're struggling. It's just a lot of disagreements. And I try to tell my couples, let's use words like and, also, instead of but, right? Yeah, he always does this. He's really good, but, and then there's a bunch of, it's like a backspace button to everything you just said, right?
Yep.
I like to tell my couples, use and, right, as well, right, also, right, and then talk about your feelings. Like, hey, yes, this is how you feel, and I think this is how it affects me, right? So I think that's a little hint that I give to my couples. Veronica, with some of that mental wealth you could give to our relationships.
I think like what I said before is really important, having checkpoints in your relationship, even if it's once a month, or, let's just sit down and have conversation about where we are, what are our goals. I mean, again, this is a very much renegotiation, reassessment time. And I think that every single couple should be thinking about having that conversation during this time together. How do we want the household to run? How do we want to give each other space? Is that okay? Really, also, like I said, for myself, really being able to swallow the truth, really being able to take in, what the other person is telling me and not take it personally, to allow myself to process and work out my thoughts without jumping to conclusions, and getting upset. I think that would be my main tip. And I will say that there is a psychologist that I really respect in a relationship called John Gottman, and the Gottman
Yes.
Institute.
Yep.
Very wealth of resources. I have a few of his books. The Relationship Cure is really great. There's one on 7 habits of making a marriage work. And then a lot of internet resources. Another really great one is a podcast called Relationship Alive. Over 100 conversations between mental health therapists specializing in couples and relationship work. So all great resources to really dive into relationship, and all different kinds of topics in that podcast. Relationship Alive, and then John Gottman. Great psychologist on relationships.
Definitely. I'll be sharing all that for our viewers also at the bottom of our screen so everybody can see. Fabio, what are your final tips for our relationships at home?
Sure. So I love what we said about not arguing. It was funny because every time I see someone who's been married for a very long time, I kind of half jokingly ask them what's their secret, but I really do want to know because I'm always trying to improve, right? So I remember this one coworker of mine, he was like, just most arguments aren't worth it. He just doesn't argue most of the time. He just kind of lets things go. Sometimes things come up that are more serious, but usually it's just not worth it, right? So at the end of the day, like you say, you're a team. You got to work together, and you got to see yourself as, if you have a problem, the problem is not between you two. The problem is outside, and you're looking at the problem together. That's one thing. I think another thing is leave nothing important unsaid, right? I think we hold on to a lot of things, right? And I give this example to my kids all the time. It's like, what happens if you take a bottle of soda and you just shake it up and you want to open the cap, right? Like everything explodes. You got to release it a little bit at a time so you can kind of air it out. So I think constant communication, I think communication gets thrown around kind of like, people would say, okay, yeah, I know communication, but they don't really communicate. So I love the check-ins. Actually, something I started doing was having yearly reevaluation meetings. So if a company can have a yearly meeting, why not a relationship? Let's review the year. What did we like? What did we not like? What do we want to plan for this coming year? What phase are we in now in this relationship?
Yes.
Realistically, you have to choose each other every day. Every morning you wake up, you got to choose to be with that partner because it's a new day, it's a new goal, and we forget that. And I think the biggest issue that most people face is they get complacent with each other, especially people who live together. It's so easy to become roommates, right? You just going through the motions, you kind of take each other for granted, and then you let the little things kind of get to you. But if you have that constant communication, you're constantly checking in with each other, and you're always trying to give, right? It's so easy to take, right? I need this, I need that. You're not doing this for me. I do more than you. And that becomes combative. But if you constantly give to your partner, that person's gonna feel that and instinctively they're gonna want to give back. So it's a win-win because if you're constantly giving to each other, you're both winning. So I think those are my biggest takeaways. And in terms of book references, I love the fact you said Love Sense. The other one I think is really important is Attached. Just learning attachment styles, between anxious, avoidant, secure. And then if you read the book, you can learn more about that. But really, like Veronica said, knowing yourself, where do your reactions come from? Where do your triggers come from? And how to really figure that out with each other, because the idea is to be a team. And if you keep on combating each other, it's going to really deteriorate. So basically, if you're not growing together, you're growing apart. So you got to try and choose each other every day and grow together as much as you can.
Yeah, and always continue learning. I mean, I think even for me as a therapist, I've been doing a lot of family work for the last 15 years, working with families in the community. And I never knew that relationships were so different, such a different style of work. And I didn't learn about like relationship styles until just a few years ago. And I was like, whoa, oh my God, there's so much I don't know about being with somebody,
Yeah.
you know? And it was so, I thought I did. I thought, oh, you know, I know about what it is like to be with people. And no, there's so much to learn. Fabio, how can people access your services?
Right. So right now you can find me through Rocio Day LLC. You know, I'm taking clients to do one-on-one and couples therapy. And I'm also doing in-home therapy through certain agencies. So that's a possibility. And then I actually just applied for my LPC, which is a licensed professional counseling. So for the next few months, looking to kind of expand and hopefully, you know, start expanding the practice from there.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today, Fabio, with this call. Veronica, I want to end it with you. I ask every therapist that comes through here, you know, sometimes I think the stigma of mental health has kind of gone down significantly, but there's still people out there that question, you know, why go to a therapist, right? Like, do I have to go to the therapist? I think for me, there's so many supplements that you need. You know, you need the faith, you need exercise, you need a lot of other things. What's your opinion about what should people consider when saying, should I go to therapy? And something that you had said about, you know, we live a life of counsel. And what are your thoughts? What do you think is something that you would say to somebody? Should I go to therapy? Or that's questioning that.
Well, I think some of my patients have really discovered that therapy was something that they really needed while they were in it. You know, like they kind of, you know, just took a risk and was like, I'm going to just do this. Everybody's telling me that maybe I should try it. And then realize like, wow, I don't really have any spaces outside of here where I'm with myself, where I'm talking about myself or trying to figure out myself, right? Because so much of our relationships, for the most part, outside of therapy, it's, you know, people are very, you know, we're so much more self-interested, right? It's like, you know, I'm saying this with the hope that I'm maybe going to get something, possibly, you know, that's overall, I want to say the way that we think. But when we're in therapy, it forces us to be the object of interest. And it's a very rare thing to happen outside of that space. So unless you know, you like to journal, unless you are really introspective, very insightful, and it's valuable to have other perspectives, because I think that, and I'm throwing, you know, I'm a very spiritual person, but I believe that even God has a comprehensive view. The universe has a comprehensive view. So I'm always going to become more whole and more understanding of myself in the world when I interact with others. And so therapy is a beautiful place to do that, because it's making me look at myself. And I'm also getting another perspective from someone who may have some information that's useful for me.
Great.
I'm always
Wonderful.
reflecting. I'm like,
yes.
oh, that's why I love meeting people. That's why I love people, because I'm like, oh, I'm going to find out another part about myself too. Like, this is great, you know? So it's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Veronica. I mean, I think we could talk for hours about this concept of relationship, right? And hopefully we could have you in as a guest at a future date.
Yeah.
Can you tell individuals that are watching or viewers how they can access your services?
Yes, so you can send a message to me on my website, thecreativetherapist.org. And you can also send me a direct email to thecreativetherapist@gmail.com if you want to set up, you know, a one-on-one session, family session. I predominantly work with women and children, which is also women and families, pretty much. So, yeah.
Do you do couple work yourself as well?
I have very few couples that I've worked with in, you know, in the time. I have not chosen to specialize in that, but when I work with families, I mean, most people who come to therapy want to talk about relationships.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you so much for joining us. And for our viewers, we will be hosting this every week. We'll be hosting a different therapist from our community of Hudson County. Thank you so much for joining us. And guys, thank you so much for everything you have given us today.
Thank you
All
both.
right. Blessings,
Thank you so
everybody.
much.
Thanks for
Thanks a
having
lot.
us.